Hi everybody, this is foXnoMad, and today I want to help you travel smarter by giving you a preview of the foXnoMad podcast. Now, if you saw my video from a couple days ago, you know that I mentioned that I wasn't going to be doing a video version aside from the off live stream from time to time because lighting conditions on the road can be difficult and setting up the audio and so on. So it's just going to be an audio podcast for now, but I wanted to share this first episode with you. And in this first episode of the podcast, I talk about traveling to Syria and bloggers running tours to Syria and the ethics of traveling to Syria. I also get into some of the best travel tech of 2019, and we touch upon the MacBook Pro, the new 16-inch MacBook Pro. If you're somebody who travels and edits a lot of videos or photos, that segment of the podcast is for you. And then wrapping it up, it's talking about Scotland and Edinburgh. And one of the things I might have just completely missed, thanks to a really helpful reader's comment, which makes me want to go back there now knowing this new information, which I wanted to share with you, plus a couple of in-flight movie reviews that you can check out on your next flight that are playing on airlines across the world. So there's no video in this first episode, it's just an audiogram, so you've got a little bit of animation, but if you wanted to check it out and you wanted to listen to it on YouTube, here you go, the first episode of the foXnoMad Travel Smarter podcast, and hopefully you'll enjoy it. Let me know in the comments below and make sure you hit the like button. There's also going to be the subscribe button to the podcast. It's down there on everything that you listen to podcasts on, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, all of them. All those links are down below if you want to subscribe to the podcast. And while you're down there, you can subscribe to this channel so you don't miss the next video. Thanks very much for watching and listening, and I hope you enjoyed the first episode of the podcast, and I will see you in the next video. Hi everybody, this is foXnoMad, and today I want to help you travel smarter. Welcome to the first episode of the foXnoMad Travel Smarter podcast. Yes, I am also doing a podcast like a trillion other people. So why am I doing a podcast is going to be the first topic that we get to today. The second one is going to be travel bloggers going to controversial destinations. Then we're going to talk about some of the best gifts and some of the best travel tech of 2019. Then I want to talk a little bit about Edinburgh and Scotland and whether or not I've become sort of jaded to certain touristic destinations. So let's start out with the first one, why a podcast? So like anything that I do on foXnoMad, on YouTube, whenever I write or say something, I try to make it with the goal to help somebody else travel smarter. I do it so that I can hopefully help you travel smarter as well. There are a lot of topics that I can't really deep dive into on the blog, and there are a lot of situations that I can't really show easily on YouTube. And a lot of people were asking me to do a podcast, so I figured why not? I'd give it a try. I've always wanted to do a podcast. I've actually been planning one for the last about 3 years almost, and I've done it with a couple of other different partners, a couple of different topics as well. And what always ended up happening is we would just want to do a podcast, so we'd record a couple of test podcasts. Now, that's not usually the way that I go about things. I'd rather just put it out there and then work on the fly and try to improve on the fly. But we recorded a whole bunch of these test podcasts. Now, I mean, there must be 15 recorded with video, audio, somewhere on somebody's hard drive, and they never saw the light of day. I think it's because we kept trying to perfect things, we kept trying to make things better, and it never really worked. It never really happened because we were too busy in the preparation phase, and then we never got to the actual putting it out phase. And so I decided this is in the middle of the holiday season when everybody's busy and traveling. I figured if this is ever going to happen, I might as well give it a shot now. And so thank you for sticking with me and listening at least this far. So I appreciate that. I wanted to do a podcast because there are a lot of stories that people ask me about. There's a lot of random things that happen to me and they never find a good place on the blog. And I can really go deeply into topics that I talk about on the blog or the videos that come up on YouTube. I can really go more into those. As far as how long these podcasts are going to be, I don't really have a good feel of that quite yet, but I feel like I'm going to fall into sort of a natural flow for the podcast pretty soon after a couple of episodes, but I don't really have an idea of quite how long they're going to be. I also don't know how this is going to work. I'm going to try to edit these as little as possible. So I'm going to try to edit them as little as possible just for my workflow. And speaking of workflow, there's going to be no video right now, at least of the podcast. And the reason is mainly because I figured that I'm going to be traveling a lot
at least on many of these episodes. So I'm going to be filming these in remote locations a lot, and I'm not going to have the opportunity to set up a decent video, at least, nothing that's going to be worth watching at least. So lighting changes, sound, all kinds of things. So for now, it's just going to be audio only, but I'm working on a video solution. But again, because I travel so frequently, I'm literally travel probably at least once or twice a month at this point. It's going to be a little bit difficult to sort of work on a video component, and I also want to get this audio component working better, figure out how to actually do a podcast. So there you go. This is the first episode of the first foXnoMad Travel Smarter podcast, and we're in it. And as I'm talking right now, I'm wondering, like, normally in a video, so when you do a YouTube video, I normally, record about four times the amount of video that actually ever makes it of my face. Like, so any of the A-roll, any of the me talking, almost always there's about 4 to 5 times as much actual video as ever makes it on to the video itself. And that's because I mess up very frequently, a lot. And with this podcast, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to save myself a little bit of time with editing and trying to go with the flow. So hopefully that works out pretty well. But there you go. There's a cough that I'm going to try to edit out. Maybe not. So let's jump right into the first topic. And this is something that came up in my Facebook feed. I follow a lot of travel bloggers. And this is something that came up twice, actually, sort of in a close succession. And then there was this article on the Daily Beast that I want to talk about, and it's travel bloggers going to controversial destinations. So let me start out here. So I have 2 travel bloggers that have done some interesting stuff. One is running tours in Syria. And when I say Syria, it's Damascus. You can't really go to too many places in Syria. And it caused a lot of controversy. The comments on this post are just insane. So this travel blogger is running a couple of tours in different places, and Syria is one of them. And I'm just going to pull up the image here. And I think when I saw it, I think that the post, I don't know if I should call people out. It's really not kind of my style. It's really not what I want to do here. But there were these photos from this tour to Damascus. And the first one that jumped out at me is everybody in the tour group is standing beneath a sign that says Syria and a huge poster of Bashar al-Assad, and they're giving the thumbs up sign. Now, to me, that just seems wrong. I mean, I don't know how else to put that. It just seems very, at least, ignorant in the sense that you're really disregarding both what a brutal dictator Bashar al-Assad is, and you're also neglecting really the whole situation that's going on in the country. I mean, the basically there are something like 600,000 people that have been displaced or killed in the last even just 2 years. And so there are all these horrible things going on. And I'm not against going to places. So I'm not against traveling to places. I mean, I've clearly been to places that are run by dictators. I mean, all governments essentially do bad things, right? So people who are in power, governments are just people in power. And so we all know that saying that power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And people with power tend to be corrupt. So no matter how good a government is, they invariably do bad things. Now, that is not to say that you can compare, let's say, the government of Sweden or Finland to the government of Syria. They're not the same thing. But my point is that as a person who wants to travel, I genuinely believe that you should go to the places that you want to travel. You want to go see those places. Because in my experience, when I go to a place, so many times the people are the people are always the best part. And you can go to a place and then you meet the people, and they're not like the government. They're people. They're normal people. Government means something, a group of people that are in power. The regular people aren't usually, I mean, it's not like you're talking to some distant entity. They're just normal people. People around the world pretty much have the same goals and hopes and dreams. And fortunately, most people around the world are really good. So I think that if you're going to go to a place like North Korea even, I think even though you are being given a very, 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 in that situation, you're being given a very curated view of the country. I think even seeing that gives you some insight. And I think for the people there, having visitors come also gives them some insight. I think keeping people separate is never really a good thing. I think the more people mix, and even in such controlled situations as that, I think it only benefits groups of people over time. So having said all of that, I'm not going to negate anything I just said, but I think the controversy here, which is something that the Daily Beast brought up and another travel blogger I follow also brought up, so I'm going to bring up what she said, and that was about going to Saudi Arabia. So she was invited by the country to go to Saudi Arabia by the tourism board, said she wouldn't do it, and that, you know, if she was going to go to Saudi Arabia, she'd have to really closely consider it because of her feelings about the regime. And I think as a travel blogger, I think that's a fair assessment. I mean, we do that for everywhere we go, right? I mean, all of us, all travelers do that. There are some places that you really want to go, but you maybe wouldn't because of either the political situation or because of your feelings about the government and so on. I think as a travel blogger, as somebody who goes to places really both to see them for myself, but also to share them with other people, I think for me, there are places that are not off limits. I would pretty much go anywhere. But working with the government, I think, is maybe the line that is a smart line to be drawn. So we're talking about, for example, Saudi Arabia. But, you know, I think you can make the case. I think those are lines that are somewhat subjective. Yeah. Basically, you can draw that line with a lot of countries. And I'm talking about Western countries. You know, you can draw that line and say, well, I wouldn't work with the government because they've done X, Y, and Z. And I think a lot of Western governments, you know, you can look back at their histories, both recent history, and not so recent history, and say, well, by going to those places, so by going to a country, for example, that's a former colony, right? So are you supporting that history? If you go to the country that colonized that country, are you supporting colonization, colonialism? I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, I don't think so. And I think working with governments is one thing, but I think the other thing is actually going to a place and seeing it. And as a travel blogger, I think that, you know, it's part of the job description to go to places and to show people a side of a place that they wouldn't otherwise see. And I think my problem with the Syria tour, especially in this case of this one blogger who wrote some things that I feel like I don't agree with. So I think in terms of a tour, I think what you're doing, and I know when people who run tours, I know when they show the photos of tours on social media, when they show them on Facebook or whatever, I know they're doing that ultimately with the goal to sell more tours. Now, that's not a bad thing, but they're going to show when people are happy, they're going to take group photos, usually in front of monumental stuff. Hey, I'm running a tour to India. Here's my Taj Mahal photo with everybody looking so happy, even though it's 4 in the, you know, if they got up at 4 in the morning to get in, probably, you know, had to like dodge monkeys or whatever. I'm kidding. Not really, if you've been to Taj Mahal. Anyway, so I know that that's what people have to do. And I think in the case of this Syria tour, I'm just going to say this is Johnny Ward. So he has a blog, One Step Forward. So I think the problem is in these kind of pictures, I think what you're basically showing, and I know that you're trying to promote your tour, and I understand that, but I think having your tour group under a huge poster of Bashar al-Assad with a thumbs up sign, like everybody looking happy, I think is really missing the bigger picture. And I don't think you can go to a place like Syria, and you're really not, like I said, these are not Syria tours. These people are going to Damascus. Damascus is like a little island of somewhat stability in a country that is essentially been destroyed, right? So I think you have to say that. And I think that having all of these people take that photo is really disrespectful to all of the people who have been involved in the conflict. And I also think it's not, and I think as a travel blogger, what I'm trying to say is you're also not really giving the full picture at all. And you're giving a tiny slice of the picture. I mean, to say that Damascus is the oldest city in the world, yeah, that's good. In 2010, Syria had more tourists than the Philippines. That is probably true. I wouldn't doubt that. Syria is historically a secular country. This is also true, meaning the Damascus bar scene is popping. All right, the bar scene is popping. I honestly have to say that, I mean, there are a couple of other things that are happening in Syria right now that have been happening for the last several years, and they're not about the bar scene. I don't necessarily know that it's not a good idea or it's wrong to run tours in Syria. I don't really know. It's not something I would do. I don't really have an interest in running tours with the occasional in Istanbul or whatever. But I don't think, I don't know if it's wrong to run a tour in Syria. I don't think they're working with the government, but I can't imagine that they're not at some level having to work with official authorities to run a tour in Syria. So it's possible that photo, that they had to take that photo. I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they had to take a picture like this. Maybe, when you go to Syria, you have to have a handler in most cases, because travel bloggers and people have done dumb stuff. They've gone where they shouldn't. They've taken pictures where they shouldn't, and they've ended up arrested. Now, for a country like Syria, where the government is just doing its best to promote its best side, I mean, they want to make things look like things are normal. So they don't want people getting arrested, but they also don't want people showing what's really going on. So now in almost all cases, you have to have a handler when you're there, apparently, according to this article in the Daily Beast. So maybe these photos that they were taken, they had to take the photos. Now, did one step forward, did that blog have to post those photos? No. And I think that if you're running, I think the conflict is, if you're running tours in Syria, you can't really talk about what's going on, because then you're not going to be able to run your tours anymore. I mean, like if I did a tour in Syria and I was, showing what's really happening there, I'm pretty sure the government would shut that down if they found out about it. So what would I do if my main goal was to make money with a tour? I would try to give the best face to the Syrian government as I could. And I think that's just a little bit disingenuous. So that's my take on it. I did want to talk just really quickly about this Daily Beast article. It says Syria faces new foreign invasion, travel bloggers, and then the subtitle is "Let me take a selfie." All right. So this article was kind of interesting. It was just a little bit, it's a little bit clickbaity, to be honest. So it talks about Eva Zubek, a 28-year-old vlogger from Poland with a social media following, sponsorship deal with Samsung, so on and so on. And she posted this video, and I watched the video, and it says in quotes in the article, "People here are really kind and really, really generous." She raves in the video, now watched more than 500,000 times. She samples old world delights, hole in the wall bakery, so on and so on. And then let's see, she wears a keffiyeh in the style of Syrian flag draped around her neck. All right, and then it goes into her background, and she says, I've been to other places that potentially you could say have viral potential or whatever you want to call it. She names northern Iraq and Yemen as well. I have been to both places also. And just pointing that out because, I'm not on some high horse or whatever. And then it said, I went to Syria because I'm personally interested in the country. Having met Syrians who told her about their homeland and that they can't visit, she said, I wasn't thinking about YouTube views or anything like that. Which, I can believe. I think as a travel blogger and vlogger, when we go places, a lot of times the spark is I want to go because there's something that interests me. And also, I can probably make a YouTube video or 4 about it, and I can write about it. And I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I mean, that's the job, right? Like if you're travel blogging or vlogging or a YouTuber, that's your job. Like you could, I suppose, go to Syria and not mention it at all, but you're really not doing the best job at your job as you could do, right? Like, I don't know if there was some corporate, event that you were invited to and then you kept skipping all these events or meetings or whatever. That's a bad example, but you see what I mean. So I understand that. A lot of times I really just want to go to a place, but always in the back of my head, I have, what am I going to write about? That leads me to my research. So what am I going to write about? What YouTube videos, what videos can I make? So what that will be is, all right, I have these ideas. Now let me do some more research. Maybe I'll get some more ideas. And I kind of plan my trip around that. So I understand what she's saying, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. The article also mentions here that 400,000 people have been killed in Syria as of April 2016, according to the United Nations when they stopped counting 1 month before. The UN accused the Syrian government of carrying out a policy of terror, barrel bombs, sarin, and chlorine gas that amounts to the crime of extermination. Many of the 259,000 people who worked in tourism in 2010 are all dead or in exile and had to find other work. So this article talks about people that they've talked to in Damascus about the tourists coming. And most of them are fairly positive. And I would also add that they probably, I'm not saying that what they're saying is not true, but I also think that you have to take it with this huge grain of salt in that these people cannot talk freely, even if they're pro-government, sure, but if they're not, or if they have any kind of even just mild criticism, right? Like none of us are pro really or against 100% everything. I mean, a government, these things are complicated, right? These things, they might be happy with certain things, they might be unhappy with other things, and they may be justifying it or rationalizing things in certain ways. And I think that level of gray is important. They may not be able to say things, even if they are minor. They may not be able to say completely to the Daily Beast, which is going to be read. They may not be able to say what they really think. And I think that's another thing to keep in mind. So going further in this article, it talks about today's visitors are different than those who came before the war when Syria was repressed but enjoying a false peace. Quote, most of them are young people, educated. This is important because those people will be our ambassadors to the outside. He says most people are happy to fill that role. They boast of their adventures, yada yada. And then it says, in Damascus, what's long been a police state has long been militarized. There's a checkpoint on every corner. Joan Townsend Torres, a 31-year-old Spaniard who visited in 2018 and has authored a guide for those who wish to follow in his footsteps. There are other military installations, he recalled, that make traditional and tourist activities like snapping a photo of everything, and then more risky things, especially in a locale that associates photography with journalism, with subversion. So I think looking at these articles, pretty much said what I think about these things. I think that as a travel blogger or vlogger or whatever, I think that going to a place doesn't necessarily legitimize that place's government or policies or whatever it may be. I think that that it depends on how you portray it, really. And I think that it's how you write about it. I don't know if you're a YouTuber and you go and you just talk to people on the street in Damascus, and everybody's positive. I don't know. I haven't been, so I can't really say. I mean, I think when you go to a place, you really get a different feel and a different vibe. And I think that it's also important to note that governments generally like influencers going to a place because they generally give a positive review, especially if they get any kind of compensation. If they get any kind of compensation, then that's a good line to draw. I would say if you're going to a place like, Damascus or certain other questionable places, I think if you're getting government sponsorship, then I think that your opinions are probably compromised there. But I think if you're going as an independent travel blogger, vlogger, whatever, I think that you can speak freely. I think that you should give the full context. You should see you should show what you saw. I think that's important. I think you should talk to the people, show and tell their stories. And I also think that, you can do your own research. There's plenty of information out there. And I think in that context, you should also include that as well. Let me know what you think about this. I'd love to hear from you. This is sort of my first podcast rant on a very, I think, a big topic. So anyway, feel free to tweet at me at foXnoMad. Let me know your thoughts on this. Are there places that you would or you wouldn't go because of the government or any other reason politically? Let me know. You can tweet at me. And on that, we are now going to switch over into a little bit less heavy topic. So we're going to go into the best gifts and the best travel tech of late 2019. All right, so welcome back. I'm just putting in, I'm putting in these little sort of musical, just couple second spots there just to sort of give your brain a break. It also gives me a time to take a sip of coffee or tea and whatever. Maybe that, let me know if you don't like those, basically is what I'm saying. All right, so we're going into the best travel tech. Now, I just posted a video on the mid-2015 MacBook Pro, which is the MacBook that I use. It's pretty spec'd out. It's a great laptop. I don't need to upgrade it. I always travel with a 15-inch laptop. I like having a bigger screen. It's the thing I stare at the most during the day. And once you have a bigger screen, especially when you're editing YouTube videos using Final Cut, I like having the bigger screen. I realize most travelers prefer the smaller 13-inch screen, but if you are in the big laptop club and you are a MacBook person, you're a Apple person, and I'm not committed to Apple. I'm just saying if you're on that fence, you know that the 2016 MacBook Pro, bad. 17, bad. 18, bad. Early 2019, bad. Lots of problems. The keyboard especially was a disaster, but also the touch bar had issues. The popping of the speakers. It's not been like it was in the past. You could get an Apple product and you could be pretty confident that, all right, I'm going to buy something that's going to last a long time. It's going to have good resale value. It's going to be a reliable and durable product, because when you travel a lot, you are really like putting your travel gear to the test. Yeah, and traveling with electronics ages those electronics more quickly, because you're taking your laptop, you're closing the lid, opening the lid, you're putting it into a backpack, and you're traveling around with it, you're throwing it in an overhead bin, taking it out in airport security or whatever. The more you use a product when you're traveling so the more you travel with the product, the faster it wears out. So you want your gear to be very durable. And for the last 4 years, it's really difficult to say that about Apple, at least their MacBook Pro line. They've had a lot of issues. The butterfly keyboard can't be replaced. A grain of dust getting into the keyboard would destroy would have you not having keys that work. When you're traveling, when you're away from home, when you're away from an Apple store, that's not something that you want to deal with. And the 2019 was not looking good either until about a month ago when Apple released the 16-inch MacBook Pro. Now, what caught my attention first of all was the 16-inch screen. The actual laptop is not much bigger than the 2015 that came. Sorry, the 16-inch laptop is not much bigger than the MacBook Pro that came out earlier in 2009, earlier this year. It's not that much bigger. They just basically reduced the bezel. So the black bars around the screen, they've kind of reduced those so that the actual viewable screen size is larger. And because of that, you get this large screen, which I like, in the same form factor, which is great. So this laptop will fit into, if you have a laptop sleeve, MacBook Pro sleeve for your 15-inch, it will fit. It will still fit. It's a little bit heavier, but it's basically the same form factor. And it is a beast of a machine. I mean, if you look at the specs, if you look at the thermals, so by making the laptop enclosure just a little bit bigger, it means that there's more room for air. More air means more cooling, means that they don't have to throttle down the CPU. And what that means is what Apple had been doing in the past was, because when the laptop starts to get hot, computers in general, when they process information, they get hot. When they get hot, they become less efficient, and heat becomes a real issue, and heat can destroy components very quickly. So that's why you have fans in your computer or in your laptop. Now, the problem with the MacBook Pros, especially the recent ones, is when they get very hot, because the case is not very big, they don't have a lot of good airflow. So to combat the potential damage that would be caused by an overheating CPU, what Apple did was called throttling, which means that they basically sort of capped the maximum speed of the processor when it was working. So let's say you have a 2.4 gigahertz processor. When the laptop started to get hot, when the temperature started to go up, they kicked the fans on, obviously. The fans were limited in how much they can cool the chip. So what Apple's solution was to just slow down the chip, just make things run slower. And that's not good. I mean, you're paying a lot of money for that processing power. So in the new 16-inch MacBook Pro, Apple has made a larger case, so a larger enclosure, which means better thermals. They still do throttle I've still seen people doing tests on YouTube, and they still do throttle that chip, but it's not quite as bad. It doesn't happen quite as often because the chip is not heating up as much. So it's a really nice looking laptop, and not to mention that they fixed the issue with the keyboard. So the keyboard is now going from what was called the butterfly keyboard to a scissor switch combo sort of keyboard. So if you've used a MacBook Pro anytime between before 2015, those keys have a lot of travel. 2017 model, for example, had almost no travel. It was a terrible keyboard. They had tons of issues with the butterfly keyboard. But the 2019 is sort of an in-between. It's not as much travel as 2015, but it's more travel than 2018, for example, which is good. You type on a laptop, if you type any amount at all, which most of us do, but especially if you write any documents with any frequency, you want a keyboard that travels. Like, it looks really cool to have a flat keyboard and typing on a screen and all that, but it's, first of all, it hurts your fingers. So it can cause tenderness in the nerve endings in your fingers. It can cause a kind of advanced type of RSI, repetitive stress injury. It's better to have a keyboard with travel. It also feels nicer to have that tactile input back from the keyboard. And it's also nice that if if a piece of dust gets into the keyboard, that it doesn't destroy your $5,000 MacBook. So they fixed a lot of the issues. I've been looking at this laptop, so I compared it recently with the 2015 MacBook Pro, and I realized there's so many things about the 2015 MacBook Pro that I'm really, really, really gonna miss in the 2019 MacBook Pro, and that I wish Apple just wouldn't be so Apple so much. Back in the day when they removed the DVD drive, I was like, oh no, what are we gonna do? I burned CDs and DVDs all the time, and so not an issue. And so Apple has a habit of getting rid of these things that we eventually just get used to because Apple can do it. And I think in the past, Apple had a vision. They could kind of see where things were going. Now what I think they're doing is, especially after Steve Jobs passed away, I think what they're doing is, all right, Steve got rid of stuff, so let's keep getting rid of stuff, and that's good. Or Steve made things like thinner and more sleek, so let's just keep getting things thinner and thinner and thinner. It's a problem with their iPhones. Like, they keep making these things thinner, but they don't have the best battery life. Like, I think all of us would accept a thicker iPhone if it had decent battery, better battery life. If it could last 3 days without having to charge it, I would take a millimeter thicker phone. So I think Apple is kind of in this situation where they're playing the greatest hits. So it's like trying to write, Queen's greatest hits, but none of the band members are there. You're like, oh, okay, so they put opera in a song, so let's do that. And let's have our lead singer have a mustache. Like, you're missing sort of the insight I think that Steve Jobs had. Anyway, so I'm going on about that. And there are a couple of things about the 2015 that I really wish 2019 had. Like, it's annoying because I am a Mac user. I do use Final Cut a lot for YouTube. Like, I edit videos all the time, so I love Final Cut. So that's kind of keeps me in the Mac ecosystem. And there's just a couple of things I'm gonna miss. First of all is the ports. So in the 2015, you've got an HDMI port. You've got, which is very useful when you're traveling. So I carry an HDMI cable with me. If the hotel or the Airbnb I'm staying at has a TV, which most of them do at this point, as a newer TV, it's going to have an HDMI port. So you can just plug in your laptop into the TV. So if you want to watch something, you can easily just, instead of having to deal with whatever 3, foreign channels that they have, I can just plug in my laptop into the TV, which is much more convenient. It's nice to have a bigger screen. I don't have to watch on my laptop, yada yada. So it's nice to have this HDMI port. SD card. SD card is, if you have a camera, if you take videos, if you take photos, SD card, I use it every day pretty much. That's something that I really, really, really wish that Apple would keep in the 2019 MacBook Pro. It's called Pro because that's supposed to stand for professional, but that term has really sort of lost its meaning now because they just put Pro, companies just put Pro in everything because they know it just means premium basically at this point. It doesn't mean professional. What I think of when I think of a professional grade machine is I want all the ports because I'm going to be doing a bunch of work on this thing. I'm going to really need it to answer all of my technical problems without needing a dongle. So you got all these ports. You've got USB-A, you've got HDMI, Thunderbolt. You've also got this little magnetic charger. So when you plug in the charger, you don't really plug in it. It just kind of magnetically sticks to your MacBook. And then if you trip over the cord, you're not going to send your laptop flying off the desk because the cord just pops off. It's really convenient. The 16-inch MacBook Pro doesn't have any of that. It's got 4 USB-C ports. And honestly, they could have probably fit 6 in there. It does have a headphone port, which is nice, I guess. But honestly, getting rid of the ports, and I know I'm like 4 years late to this argument, but getting rid of the ports, the magnetic charging cable, they all just sort of, they're all such a bummer. I'm thinking about making this upgrade. I think if you're at the 2015 MacBook Pro, and I think if you've got a pretty powerful machine, 2015 MacBook Pro, I think that's going to last you, like I said in the video, another 2 to 3 years solidly. If you're a heavy user, you're using Final Cut, you're editing videos and such, a programmer, that kind of thing, I think it's going to probably give you another good year of use. And then it's going to start to lag, I think, especially with the next version of with Mac OS. So those are my thoughts on the new MacBook Pro. Check out the video. Let me know what you think of the new MacBook Pro. I'm on the fence. I really want to give it 6 more months. I want to see how durable and how many issues come up with the new MacBook Pro. It's already having issues with the speakers popping. And yes, Apple says it's just a software issue, but that laptop, if you spec it out, is we're talking about $4,000 or $5,000. I don't want a software issue that glaring if I'm going to pay that much money. I'm sorry. Is it too much to ask that the speakers don't pop every time you pause or start audio? I mean, it's kind of a big deal. It's not a minor bug, and it's something that they should have caught in their quality control. All right, rant over with products that I wish were better. Here's something that I mentioned in my gift guide, which is turned out to be very popular. I don't know how I've lived without this thing for so long, but these are basically a multi-charging USB cable. Now, if you haven't seen one of these, I'll leave links in the show notes, but it's basically you plug in one into USB, and then on the end, it's got 6. Sometimes you can get more connectors, but this one has 6 connectors. You've got micro USB, you've got a lightning cable, you've got USB-C, you've got all the different USB connectors. So you just need to plug in one USB-A port. You just need to plug one USB 3 side of it into something, and then you've got all these other connectors. So you don't need to carry around 6 different cables. You just carry around one, plug it in once, and now you can charge all of your stuff. It's really, really handy. They come in 2 packs, and they're only about $10 or $12. If you're shopping for a traveler, even if you're looking for you're looking for something more expensive, these things are so useful. They make such a great gift. It's something that I would highly recommend that you take a look at. It's a multi-USB charging cable. I will also leave a link in the show notes to that. And there's also a whole YouTube video I made about it also. And finally, I want to talk a little bit about Scotland. So I want to talk a little bit about, I posted a video on how to spend 48 hours in Edinburgh. People will tell you it's Edinburgh, not Edinburgh or Edinburgh, which I say a lot. Edinburgh, that's how they pronounce it. So there's a little travel tip for you. So anyway, I did a video about the city which I lived in a few years ago, and I love the city. I love Scotland. It's one of my favorite countries in the world. It's easily in the top 3, easily. And the Scottish Highlands are just one of the places I think every person, if they have the opportunity, should go and visit. So anyway, I posted this video about how to spend 48 hours in Edinburgh. And so this is 48 hours on what to do in the city. It's mostly the major touristic places and how to organize that 48 hours. Because the city is not very big. It's a pretty small city. You can walk across it really in 30 minutes. The problem is the weather changes every 15 minutes. So you've got to really be careful with how you plan, because if you plan poorly, you're going to get caught in rain and you're going to be indoors when it's sunny, and then it's going to kind of throw off your 48-hour plan. So the way I arrange it is I want to make sure that you get your outdoor activities sort of earlier in your plans, and then kind of piece together your indoor plans so that you can kind of space it out, and hopefully the timing works out for you so you can do your outdoor stuff without rain, and then you can do your indoor stuff when it is probably raining, because it does, it rains a lot, but it can rain 10 times in one day and also be sunny and beautiful weather also 10 times in one day. I'm not kidding. So in that video I talked about the Edinburgh Castle, and I kind of was a little bit dismissive of it, and somebody wrote me a very thoughtful comment on that video, which I really appreciated. It talked about the history, about why it's Scotland's most visited tourist attraction. I said originally that you shouldn't go inside, that you could go inside. It's probably I would say it was going to 2 hours inside. It's about the amount of time that will take you to really explore it. But that the main benefit that you get from going in the castle are the views. And you can get pretty much the same views from either side of the castle entrance without actually going in and spending time in the castle. There's also a museum called the Atlas Obscura, and that's very close. If you have kids, you should definitely go there. It's an interactive museum. It's really cool. It's also near the castle. If you go up to the very top, the roof, you also got very similar views as you get from the castle. I have been to a lot of castles, and I think I'm a little bit jaded on castles. So if you read this guy's comment, it's actually very thoughtful and well written, and talks about the history. It's very useful. So actually, maybe I'll just pull it up here. But I think that it kind of started to get me thinking, like, is it possible to travel to too many touristy things? And honestly, yeah, it probably is. I mean, when I go to a place talking about travel bloggers planning something out, I almost always go to the touristy things to check them out and potentially write about them, because I know it's where a lot of people want to go, and a lot of you are going to want to go to those places, so I might as well go and see what they're like. And oftentimes I'm surprised by a place. So it kind of like going to a place. You ever notice how your friends or your parents or people who give you the worst advice about a place is don't go there, or this place is like this, or this place is like that. They talk so definitively, and almost always they've never been there. That's just sort of a thing. And so it's kind of like that. So I want to go to a place, so at least I can, if I'm going to be whatever about it, at least I've been there and I have some firsthand experience. All right, so this comment, let's see what this says. History is not for everyone. All right, I love history. It has 2 million visitors a year. It's been fortified for the last 3,000 years. It's set on a volcanic plug formed millions of years ago. This is the Edinburgh Castle. It is the most attacked castle in the UK. The oldest surviving building is, quote, only 900 years old. The castle's history is Scotland's history. King James I was born there in 1566. The oldest crown jewels in the UK were used as coronations. Every day they fire a gun at 1 o'clock that can be heard across the city. And in August, for 3 weeks, a military tattoo, is that right? Is held, which is seen by over 100 million TV viewers around the world. All right, the guy pumped me up about the castle. I didn't know all this stuff. I mean, really, when I go to the castle, I just see the views are really nice from the castle. There is a war memorial there, which I think is lovely the way it's set out. And there's also a really cute, can I use that term for memorial? A cute graveyard for the service dogs as well, who have been lost fighting wars too. And I think that was my favorite part of the castle. As far as like inside the castle, it's sort of like, I'm in Istanbul now, and there's Topkapı Palace. It's not very interesting. It's old castle. Like castles, they're not too interesting to me. They all kind of start to look the same. They're just stone walls, and then there's not a lot going on inside them except touristy things. Because those places are not actually in use as castles, and you're not traveling back in time, they lose something for me. But if you saw my video, maybe want to check out that comment as well. It's an interesting comment. It might get you interested to go to the castle. It certainly made me more interested to learn about the history of the castle, but not necessarily go back to the castle. All right, and so for this final portion of the first foXnoMad Travel Smarter podcast, there's something that I don't watch a ton of movies. I don't watch a lot of movies, but when I'm on a plane, I almost always watch at least one or two. And they're usually movies that I would never watch otherwise. I would never just come across. But I did catch 2 movies that I want to talk about. The first movie, I actually went to the premiere of a documentary, and that was the Never Surrender, the Galaxy Quest documentary. Let me just say this. If you've never seen Galaxy Quest, maybe the best Star Trek movie ever, maybe one of the best sci-fi movies ever. It was actually one of the biggest movie producers in the world called it one of the 4 perfect films, and one other film on that list was The Godfather. So that's giving you some context. It's a great movie. It's basically about a group of actors. If you're going to put it in the Star Trek context, let's do it that way. So these are a group of actors. Their show is over and they're going to conventions. They're not, they're sort of out of their prime, and they're not really working actors anymore. They basically make a living off of going to conventions. It's got Tim Allen, it's got Sigourney Weaver, it's got Alan Rickman, Sam Rockwell. It's got a great cast, and they're all very funny in it. And but what happens to start out the movie is a group of aliens visit Earth because they're having some intergalactic trouble, and they visit these actors because they think the show that was broadcast in space, obviously they think that the show was a historical record, and it just goes from there. The film is very funny. It's got a great heart as well, and it's also, I think, a very clever movie too. So I highly recommend that you check out the documentary. I will leave a link in the show notes. And then I want to talk about this other movie that I would recommend that you watch on your next flight. It's on all the major airlines right now, and I've flown a whole bunch of major airlines recently, and I've checked. It is on there. And that movie is called Yesterday. Essentially, the premise of the movie is there's this struggling musician, and he's got a group of friends that go to his bar or his pub, playing. So there's only a couple of people watching him play. His music is not very popular or very good. And one day he has an accident. He falls off his bike. Something happens. All the power around the world goes out. And the first scene, one of the first scenes after that is he's testing out a new guitar. I think he gets a guitar as a gift, and he starts playing Yesterday. Yesterday. So he starts playing Yesterday, and what I love about this scene. So let me set this up for you. What I love about this scene is that he starts playing Yesterday, and the actress, I'm really bad with names, and I didn't look it up. So her face, just that expression on her face, is so powerful, and it makes you realize how good and just how moving the Beatles really the music is. And she starts kind of welling up, and it's almost like pride, and she's filled with this emotion. She asks, "That's beautiful. When did you write that? Or who's that about?" And the guy says, "It's Yesterday." The Beatles, and they all look confused. All of his friends look confused. He goes back home, Googles the Beatles. Only the bug comes up. Essentially, he lives in a world where whatever happened that night, all the Beatles music stopped existing. He's the only one who remembers the Beatles, and he's a musician. So then he starts recreating the Beatles music, and it goes from there. What I like about the movie is that it has a lot of heart, it has a lot of good music. If you love the Beatles, you should absolutely watch this movie. It's great. But also it doesn't spend too much time on the actual mechanics of what's going on. In other words, it's not a sci-fi movie. It's not something that's getting into why this event happened. It doesn't really matter. What matters is the story of this musician and his life, and how it changes because he's the only guy in the world who knows the Beatles music, and he passes it off as his own music. It's a great film. It's really funny. It's really cute. It's very enjoyable. So if you are flying anytime soon, obviously you can download this probably on Netflix or whatever, but if you're flying, it's on all the major airlines right now. I would highly recommend that you check it out. I'm always looking for a good movie to watch on my next flight. So if you have any recommendations, tweet at me at foXnoMad. And thanks very much for listening to this very first foXnoMad podcast. I'd love to hear your feedback, how this can get better, what I can do differently, and so on. It's a little bit, to be honest, intimidating to talk for this long without really editing the content. What I like about writing is I can really nail down what I want to say. I mean, it's really like sculpting. You can chisel away, you can change words, you can even update a post after it's been published. YouTube is a little bit different. When you make a video, you've got to be more concise. So I try to be as efficient with my words as possible. I try to cut that down. But again, it's an edited thing, and it's a lot shorter, and I don't just ramble on too much. Podcast is a little bit different, but hopefully it's like us having a conversation. And I don't have a co-host. Maybe I'll have guests in the future. And hopefully with your feedback, this will all get a lot better and more useful for you on your travels. Thanks very much for listening. Tell your friends about it if you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next podcast.